Russian mill bloggers are freaking out over a new American Shahed, and for once, they're not entirely wrong because Lucas is kind of unjammable. Hey friends, Wes here, Army and Air Force veteran, and we just saw Lucas debut in Operation Epic Fury. Now, Lucas stands for Low Cost Uncrewed Combat Attack System. It's built by Spectre Works, a defense company in Arizona, a place that I'm trying to get to visit this year, some point to see some family. The unit is being cited at around $35,000. Now, that number matters. A single MQ-9 Reaper costs tens of millions. A single cruise missile can cost more than an entire subdivision of houses. Lucas is the Costco version of the long-range strike capability. It's a disposable flying explosive designed to show up in numbers. Now, open source descriptions put it in the Shahed class, roughly 10 feet long, wingspan around 8 feet, and a maximum takeoff weight around 180 pounds. It can be launched from catapults, rocket-assisted systems, trucks, and even ships. In December of 2025, the U.S. tested launches from the USS Santa Barbara, an Independence-class littoral combat ship operating in the Gulf. That wasn't a science fair demonstration. That was the U.S. Navy saying, every time I come in the kitchen, you're in the kitchen, eating up all the mass drones.
Every time I come in the kitchen, you're in the kitchen.
Now, Lucas reportedly saw its first combat use on February 28, 2026, when U.S. forces launched it against Iranian targets during Operation Epic Fury. The message was not subtle. The U.S. openly framed it as using a drone modeled on Iran's own design against Iran. The Pentagon didn't even pretend this was original art. Now, the Shahed 136 is one of the most influential weapons of the Ukraine war. Iran exported it, Russia used it, Ukrainian cities paid the price. The Shahed became notorious because it solved a simple problem for Russia. It let them hit infrastructure and terrorize civilians at scale with cheap airframes. The point wasn't precision, the point was volume. Force Ukraine to spend scarce interceptors, exhaust crews, and accept that some drones will get through. Now, Ukraine has shot down thousands of Shaheds, but Russia kept sending more. Russia's entire drone strategy was essentially build enough of them that Ukraine runs out of missiles before Russia runs out of sheet metal. Solid plan right up until America opened the same store across the street. That campaign created a live-fire laboratory. The US also had access to captured airframes. Now that part isn't mysterious. Ukraine has recovered Shaheds, Western partners have examined them. Spectre Works already had a Shahed-inspired target drone called the FLM-136 used for threat emulation training, or OP4. That means the company was already building fake Shaheds so US forces could practice detecting them and engaging them. The leap from training target to real weapon turned out to be short. Lucas was unveiled publicly in July of last year. It showed up in combat less than 8 months later. In Pentagon time, that's warp speed. That timeline would be considered a joke in traditional acquisition culture. Here, it happened anyways. 8 months from unveiling to combat deployment. For context, the Russian military once took 11 years to field a new assault rifle variant, and they're still using the tank design that Nikita Khrushchev would recognize. There's also a key procurement detail. The US government owns the intellectual property outright. That means the design can be scaled across multiple manufacturers if demand spikes. So far, there's no clear public count on how many Lucas drones exist, but we know the US is on track to have 380,000 units by 2028. And now we get to the part that made Russian mill bloggers panic. After the operation, Russian military channels started circulating footage of earlier ship launch tests and zooming in on one small detail on the Lucas, a satellite communications terminal. That's the part they're scared of because it suggests this isn't just a cheap one-way drone, it's a cheap one-way drone with a high-quality link. And if that link is Starshield, which is the military version of Starlink, or anything in that class of satellite connectivity, then Russia's favorite trick from Ukraine, GPS jamming and spoofing, suddenly stops being a universal answer. Let's talk about why Starshield is very difficult to jam. And if Lucas has Starshield, Russia's got a problem. Start with the baseline Russia has been working from: GPS. GPS satellites sit in medium Earth orbit around 20,000 kilometers up. They transmit relatively low power navigation signals over narrow bands. By the time those signals reach ground, They're weak. That's not a bug, it's just how navigation satellites work. It also means GPS jamming is, by electronic warfare standards, a solved problem. If your jammer is close enough and strong enough, you can drown out legitimate signals at the receiver. That's the basic math. The jammer wins when it delivers more power at the receiver than the satellite signal does. Now, Russia has leaned on that in Ukraine. Mobile jamming systems, truck-mounted, designed to create large bubbles of denial. They've degraded the accuracy of various GPS-guided systems and forced Ukraine and Western suppliers into a constant cat-and-mouse game of software patches, alternate guidance modes, and tactics changes. Now, compare that with Starlink and Starshield. This is a different physics problem. Starlink is a low Earth orbit constellation, thousands of satellites around the 550-kilometer range, moving at roughly 27,000 kilometers per hour. The terminal isn't pointing at one fixed satellite like an old-school dish. It's constantly handing off from one satellite to another as the constellation moves overhead. Depending on geometry, it may be talking to multiple satellites across short windows and then switching again. So when Russia sees a Starshield-style terminal on a Lucas weapon, it sees a moving target on top of a moving network. Jamming one satellite link is doable. Jamming a whole constellation footprint in a region across time, as satellites move through constantly changing positions, is a completely different assignment. That's not a park a jammer truck near the front line problem. That's a campaign problem. Now, the power issue gets worse for the jammer too. GPS signals are weak at the receiver. Communication satellites generally transmit more power than navigation satellites. Starlink is also much closer than GPS. A satellite only 550 kilometers away gives you a stronger received signal than one 20,000 kilometers away. All things being equal, that means the jammer needs more effective power to overpower the link at the receiver, especially if the terminal is using a directional antenna and modern signal processing. Then you multiply the problem. You're not trying to overpower one stable signal, you're trying to overpower a frequency-hopping, rapidly switching, multi-satellite link that keeps changing the geometry on you. This is why analysts who study space security have described it as harder to jam or interfere with Starlink than with GPS. The jammer is fighting stronger signals, closer satellites, and constant movement. Now add the nightmare ingredient, scale. One Chinese military research simulation modeled a scenario requiring at least 935 synchronized airborne jammer drones to fully suppress Starlink services over Taiwan, with lower power jammers requiring up to 2,000 synchronized nodes. That study was specifically examining the Taiwan contingency and acknowledged that Starlink's actual anti-jamming measures remain classified. Yeah, because Starshield is a lot more difficult than Starlink. China's numbers suggest that blanketing a region against Starshield connectivity is not a truck-mounted problem. It is a fleet-scale problem requiring hundreds of coordinated platforms, each of which is itself vulnerable to air defenses. Starlink also employs spread spectrum modulation, a transmission technique that distributes the signal across a wide range of frequencies in a pattern that changes constantly, according to a cryptographic key shared only between the terminal and the network. Even if you treat those studies as imperfect, the trend line is the point. This is not a single platform solution. It's a fleet-scale effort, and each jammer platform becomes a target. So if Russia wants to solve Starshield-like connectivity in a war, it's not just buying a jammer, it's building an entire suppression architecture that has to survive long enough to do its job. Then there's the waveform issue. The signal is distributed across a wide range of frequencies in a pattern that changes. If you jam one slice, you often just hit noise. If you try to jam the whole spread, you need huge power, and then you still run into encryption and key-based modulation patterns that you can't predict without access to the underlying key management, which is top secret, of course. Starshield adds another layer on top of the commercial baseline. Designed for military use, that means the encryption, authentication, and key management are more hardened and more tightly controlled. So the practical effect is that spoofing becomes extremely difficult, and jamming becomes extremely expensive. Can it still be jammed? I would say yes, no system is unjammable, but the resources required to meaningfully degrade a Starshield-connected weapon at the exact moment of a strike is far higher than anything Russia has consistently shown in Ukraine. You would need coordinated, multi-platform electronic warfare in the right place at the right time against a target that's moving, encrypted, and switching satellites as it goes. That is a very different order of problem for Russia than parking a truck-mounted jammer near the front line and calling it a day. One Russian military blogger writing under the channel Russian Engineer noted the implication plainly. American long-range strike weapons equipped with Starshield could be controlled anywhere on the planet and achieve the same precision as FPV drones literally through a window. That blogger called it a, quote, genuine revolution in military affairs. It's kind of hard to argue. There's also another layer Russia hates, and that's adaptation. Starlink software has evolved after Ukraine reports have described updates that allow terminals to derive positioning using signals from multiple satellites rather than relying only on GPS, using timing and geometry to compute location. If that's accurate, then the battlefield lesson is brutal for jammers. Even if you crush GPS, the system may have ways to route around it. So when Russian mill bloggers panic, they're not panicking about Lucas, which is just a cheap airframe. They're panicking about that cheap airframe that might be connected to a network they can't easily silence. And if you spent years building your confidence around GPS jamming bubbles, that kind of development makes your stomach drop. Rybar, a Russian military blogger with 1.5 million followers on Telegram, suggested that Russia begin immediately developing the capability to destroy thousands of Starlink satellites in orbit. That is, and I say this with genuine respect for ambition, adorable. Russia's current GDP is smaller than Italy's. They are selling gold reserves to keep the lights on. But yeah, let's greenlight the multi-trillion-dollar anti-satellite mega project. Sure, Russia. So let's step back from Iran and talk about the actual implications for Ukraine, because this technology doesn't stay in one theater. Lucas validates something Ukraine has been proving since 2022. Mass-produced expendable drones with reliable connectivity can change the shape of war. They force defenders into cost-per-shot decisions. They exhaust air defense crews. They stretch radars and shooters across wide areas. They create constant pressure. Ukraine has been building its drone industry under fire, often with improvised components and brutal creativity. Now, U.S. industry is taking the same concept and putting it on American production line with American procurement and a very clean unit cost. That convergence matters. Ukraine's battlefield experience plus American manufacturing scale plus resilient connectivity is not a scenario the Kremlin planned for in 2022. Russia's electronic warfare advantage has been real in Ukraine. It's also been bounded. If the US and its partners field more weapons that rely less on vulnerable GPS-only guidance and more on resilient, updatable links, Russia's EW playbook becomes less decisive. Russia understands that, and it's the one reason Russian channels are treating Lucas like a problem that doesn't stay in the Middle East. That's it for today, my friends. Remember, subscribing is the best way to support my work here. By the way, yes, I was just on CNN to talk about drone warfare, and even the producers at CNN thought this was a fake background. Guys, look, I'm 40 years old. I've been collecting books since I was a kid. Some of you, my viewers, send me books, which is amazing. Send me more. I love books, and I will read them and put them right here on this shelf. So just to prove it, I'm going to walk back here and say, let's say, okay, Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot, right? That right here is a classic, and there's the man, the myth, the legend on the back. What else we got here? Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, John Meacham. Come on. Okay, I'm back. We're back. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.